If you're a weeb with an internet connection, then there's no doubt in my mind that you've seen this elf girl somewhere on your timeline within the past few months. But in the incredibly unlikely chance that you haven't, this is Frieren from the anime Frieren Beyond Journey's End, a story about a practically immortal elf girl learning to create deeper connections with humans through her adventures, even though they age and perish at a much faster rate than her. What makes Frieren stand out in comparison to other fantasy anime, though, is the fact that her story doesn't start at the beginning of her adventures, it starts at the very end after her and her companions have already slayed the Demon King and brought peace to the lands. So rather than this being the story of Frodo and Sam bringing the One Ring to Mount Doom, this is more like the story of Legolas and Gimli adventuring for a few decades after everyone already left for the Undying Lands. I highly doubt anyone watching this right now hasn't seen the anime or read the manga, but just in case, there's my synopsis. Now, I do have a confession for all of you watching this video right now. I hate fantasy anime. I haven't watched a single one since season 1 of That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. I know some people will swear by that series, but it just wasn't for me. I do have a few exceptions like Konosuba and ReZero, but that was because I watched those before the great isekai fatigue of 2018. I'm certain a few people watching this right now may be thinking, but wait, you're talking about isekai and fantasy like they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. And you're right, they technically are two different things, but they share enough similarities that one could put me off of the other. If there's a party of 3 to 5 adventurers with Dungeons and Dragons inspired abilities and classes setting out to vanquish some sort of demon king, I'm usually not interested. Part of the problem is that I'm also a massive Tolkien purist. Between the comfy rolling hills of the Shire and the grand halls of the dwarves beyond the scope of human imagination, all other fantasy series have a lot to compete with. And I think fantasy anime in particular feels formulaic and mass-produced to the point where it loses a lot of the charm I look for in the genre. For me, fantasy is a genre that's near and dear to my heart because it takes me back to a time where me and my friends were kids running through the woods armed with sticks and handmade maps, pretending that we were a party of adventurers looking for a lost elven city. Quick side note, these woods also happen to be the same woods where the Blair Witch Project was filmed, but I didn't know that till I was already a grown-ass adult, so my childhood memories remain untainted. Now, I'm not saying that fantasy anime is objectively bad, or because Lord of the Rings exists, it devalues any other fantasy media. I'm just saying that I personally don't like fantasy anime. That is until I decided to binge watch every episode of Frieren Beyond Journey's End and become a born-again fantasy anime enthusiast. Now, in all honesty, Frieren is guilty of most of the shit I said I don't like about fantasy anime. There's a party of adventurers, there's fantasy abilities and classes, hell, there's even a nameless cookie-cutter demon king. But where Frieren shines is that it only uses this setting as a vehicle to tell the type of story it wants to tell. You see, Frieren takes a niche and unexplored aspect of the fantasy genre like the longevity of elves when compared with humans, and has that be a main plot focus in order to create a more nostalgic story that emphasizes the importance of humanity's fleeting lives. Not to mention the entire plot of the anime so far has been Frieren retracing her steps from her journey 80 years prior so she can tell her dead friends in heaven that she wishes she valued her time with them more. Now, I'm going to elaborate more on the brilliant use of nostalgia a little later in this video, but there's actually a lot more that goes into Frieren that makes it a truly special fantasy experience. One thing in particular that I'm certain a lot of people have taken note of is that this show is a complete vibe. Between the dappled forest with beams of sunlight peeking through the trees and the charming looking fantasy villages, the visuals in Frieren elicit a feeling of comfort and familiarity. I feel like I want to go for a walk in the woods or see if my local Renaissance festival is in town. This anime really immerses you into the vibe of the universe. I would even go as far as to say that Frieren counts as an Iyashikei anime, or at least Iyashikei adjacent. I feel comforted by a lot of the visuals. For those here who don't know what Iyashikei means, it's essentially a subgenre of anime or manga with a focus on healing the viewer/reader through peaceful scenery or comforting aesthetics. Some prime examples of Iyashikei are series like Laid Back Camp, K-On!, and My Neighbor Totoro. For the love of God, if you haven't yet, please watch Laid Back Camp, that shit is so fucking comfy. Most enthusiasts would probably disagree with me calling Frieren an Iyashikei series because at its core it's a drama and an adventure story, but I feel like the anime adaptation has leaned into the comforting and nostalgic imagery to a point where it could be considered healing. In the episode where Frieren and Fern spent the whole time looking for a rare flower in the woods, it reminded me of all the time I spent after school looking for snakes and owls in the woods when I was a kid. Once again, let's ignore the fact that I did all of this in the Blair Witch Woods. But when I was watching that episode, all I could think was, oh, to be a whimsical elf looking for rare flowers in the woods. I'm a grown-ass man! I don't even remember the last time I touched grass. How the fuck does this make me think all this shit? Now, not all of the visuals in Frieren are comfy and relaxing, because when it comes time to get down and dirty with a fight scene, Studio Madhouse pulls no punches. These fight scenes are fluid with incredible choreography. Pulls no punches, get it? Like fighting. Okay, I'll go home. I mean, what do you expect from the animation studio that brought us One Punch Man Season 1? We don't talk about Season 2. And because fight scenes are so few and far between in this series, when they actually pop up, they hit that much harder. Not to mention, Frieren blessed us with one of the coldest moments in anime history.
Ara, kill yourself.
I genuinely hope to God that this somehow becomes the new generation's version of Asuka saying pathetic from End of Evangelion. Now, I don't necessarily watch Frieren for the fight scenes. I don't think it's supposed to be a battle shonen, but in a world where we're so spoiled for choice when it comes to amazing fight animation with series like Jujutsu Kaisen, Demon Slayer, Chainsaw Man, and more, the fact that the animators popped off this hard in a series where the fights aren't even that big of a deal shows just how much love and care went into the creation of this anime adaptation. But this is where I want to kind of loop everything back around to what I think is the crown jewel of what makes Frieren so special, and that's nostalgia, a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past. Frieren is the embodiment of nostalgia. We are quite literally witnessing a journey down memory lane with each episode. Every week, we see more and more of Frieren's connection with Himmel and the rest of her party revealed as each memory is stirred by her returning to a familiar location. And all the while we have this nostalgic trip, we have Frieren and Stark to anchor us in the present. Where Frieren wishes she opened herself up to her former companions more, she has the opportunity to do so now. Now, I'm not sure how many people watching this video are knowledgeable about 11th century Japanese literature, but the brilliant usage of nostalgia in Frieren actually reminds me a lot of the first ever fiction novel, The Tale of Genji. For the uninitiated, which I'm assuming is 99.9% of all living humans, there's a recurring plot thread in The Tale of Genji where the main character, Hikaru Genji, laments for most of his life that all of the lovers he's taken on aren't like his first love, Lady Fujitsubo, who also happened to be the wife of his father, Emperor Kiritsubo, making The Tale of Genji not only the first ever fiction novel, but also the first ever NTR and incest dojin. Why the fuck did I leave that in the script? Genji courts, bangs, and marries many different women of power and status in his life, but eventually he realizes in middle age that one woman in particular, Murasaki no Ue, is probably the best he's ever gonna get, so he goes back to see her, then she dies and the book ends. You may find yourself asking, what the fuck does any of this have to do with Frieren? But I think both of these stories share a similar theme of nostalgia and longing, where both of their respective protagonists go on a journey of sorts to try to find a ghost of their past. Though not romantic in nature like Genji's bond with Murasaki no Ue, Frieren also grows a stronger connection with her young human companions Frieren and Stark through their adventures north. Now, one thing I've been thinking since the introduction of the concept of heaven in Frieren is, what if it doesn't actually exist, and this 10-year trip down memory lane doesn't take Frieren any closer to communicating with Himmel the hero? And if that does end up being the case, I'd argue that Frieren retracing the steps she took 80 years ago is a symbolic form of communication between her and her departed friends. Through her journeys, Frieren has encountered countless relics of her past, whether it be statues of her party from their adventuring days, meeting old folks she saw when they were kids all those years ago, to even seeing aspects of her old companions and her new ones. So maybe this is one of those cases where it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Maybe the real adventure were the friends we made along the way. Holy shit, this really is one of those series, isn't it? Frieren may not be Lord of the Rings, but to me it has enough charm and whimsy that it absolutely holds up as a fantasy series in comparison. Now, I don't read the manga, so I have no idea where this story is going, but I'm certainly going to be going along for the ride and seeing where this brilliant concept takes us. So there we go. Frieren has made a fantasy anime hater like myself finally admit that my mind has been changed. Except for all of the parts where they're eating giant cheeseburgers. That really takes me out of the fantasy.